Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Now, right up front here, I have quite a few doctor's appointments this week. I've been having some health issues, and as a result, this video has been late. I'm trying to get an early start on this week to try and prevent that, but yeah, if you're hearing this part of the video, then I guess the video is late. I have quite a few small things to talk about at the top of the show, which will be pretty brief, and then we'll get into the bigger stuff towards the end, so let's get started. First up today from Earwis, we've got a very simple change. I'll probably just show the screenshot from the PR, and that'll be about all there is to it. This takes the vehicle part display and makes its alignment look just significantly better. This is a small and very straightforward change, but undeniably it is more appealing. Next up today from Terminator244, we've got additional professions for the crazy party scenario. This is the scenario that starts you in the resort location, which we talked about previously having been reworked. They're not crazy professions or anything, it's just an expansion of what little there was previously. I figured I should probably mention this since people might be looking to try that scenario again after the recent rework. Next up today, also related to professions, is a change from, I'm gonna say, GVs. It adds a mounted police officer profession that starts with a horse and assorted police gear. The horse is the most noteworthy thing here, and it's actually a variation of the horses that already exist in the game. The idea was to buff it slightly so the police horse wouldn't run away from literally everything at all times the way other horses do. Now, whether it works properly or not, I really don't know. Training horses has been discussed at length in the past, and no one has ever bothered to do anything about it because we usually come back to the idea that it would require some sort of animal handling skill or like a hidden stat for horses about their tameness or training, things like that. But anyway, this profession was added, and as far as I know, it's the only one in the game that starts you with a horse. Moving along today, our next change is from Bombastic Slacks, and it addresses something that I touched on in my last video. I had tried out the new perks mod, and immediately upon loading into the game, I broke it and didn't know what had happened. I was pretty sure it was related to the fact that the perk mod pop-up did not happen until 30 seconds into the game, and by moving around I had broken it and never got that pop-up. Well, now this perk pop-up should appear basically as soon as you start a new character, and there is text on what to do if you're like me and somehow managed to break that pop-up. I mention this mostly because it was the only issue I had when I was trying the mod. I otherwise think that mod is a pretty great addition to the game. It really seems like no matter what I'm talking about, I somehow always manage to break the thing that I'm testing. Now regardless though, hopefully this will protect other people from encountering that same issue, even if it was probably almost certainly entirely my own fault. Now regarding the mod, there were also a couple other additions and tweaks that I saw, although I didn't really look at them in detail. At least one new perk was added, and if I remember, I'll try to add the link in the description of the video. Also, just to be a good member of the community, you may be interested to know that Bombastic Slacks has recently been streaming as he works on Cataclysm stuff. Now, I've only watched part of one stream personally, and it does appear to be coding specifically, which is, definitely not for everyone, but you may be interested in seeing a dev think and work live on a stream. I will put a link to his YouTube channel in the description of this video, or you can find it in the announcements of the dev Discord to see when he will be streaming next. Moving on though, next up today from Candleberry, we've got a simple change that should fix traumatized travelers from spawning too much. And if you're unfamiliar, this is an NPC that appears at the hub bar that we previously discussed, which I guess would have been before 0.G's content freeze. Anyway, this NPC would spawn, and then when the player came back to the location, they would spawn again, and this would just keep happening with more and more of them taking up more and more space in the bar. I did see some pictures of this floating around on Discord, so I figured that I would mention it's been fixed now. The NPCs here are actually supposed to despawn, and then they will have new ones spawn every time that the player comes back, so the population of the bar changes over time. Unfortunately, the travelers were not despawning, although they should now properly do so, and this should prevent them from dominating that location. Alright, moving on, we've got a change from Carol, which removed quite a few creatures from the game. These were some of the joke creatures, as well as some that just didn't really fit as they existed previously. So for example, we have the creature called the Cyclopean. I found these basically anytime I was in a subway looking for a lab, I would come across quite a lot of these creatures. They are the purple-haired, one-eyed mutants, which is a reference to Leela from Futurama. There's also Blinky, which was a three-eyed fish, which is a reference to The Simpsons, and the Killer Rabbit is a Monty Python thing. None of them really fit with the game and were just references for the sake of being a reference. Now, I do think without the Cyclopeans, underground locations might be a little bit sparse. They used to be just all I would ever find when I went down there. Hopefully something will come forward to fill that void. Rat Kings were moved to the Zedra mod, and reindeer-related creatures were moved to the Christmas event spawns, but also to the Megafauna mod. I had no idea that Megafauna was even a mod, but apparently it is. And then finally, the gigantic naked mole rat got the axe completely and is no longer in the game. I'm not really sure why it wasn't moved to the Megafauna mod, but since I'm not familiar with it, I'll assume that there was a good reason for that. Or possibly it was moved over and I just didn't see that part of the PR. Now, it was suggested that the mole rats be reworked slightly so that they can remain in the game, and I suspect that very likely will happen in the future, but as for now, they are removed. Carol also mentioned a desire to remove the mass of zombie spiders, which I personally would advocate for their removal. It seems like they were hesitant to pull these animals, but they really don't make sense with our lore. We know that zombification doesn't affect the smallest creatures, and I just don't really understand why they were added in the first place. And I think I even complained about them when they were added, and there was a big discussion around whether they should exist in the first place, and I thought they had already been removed, but apparently not. But anyway, as for this actual PR, I don't really have any thoughts here. Carol offered reasons for each of these removals, and they do make sense. Now, I will say some people already have mentioned the mole rat's removal and complained about it. I think just honestly, they were just this iconic giant creature in the game before we had very many giant iconic creatures. Nowadays we have all these giant insects in the game and huge mutants, but the mole rat was really like the first of those to make it into the game. So although people will notice this and possibly be disappointed, there are plenty of other giant monstrosities out there for you to deal with. Next up today from Dev Vengol, we've got flashlight attachment points for hard hats and military helmets. Now the idea here is simple. You will take your flashlight, you will attach it to a helmet that you are wearing, and hooray, you now have a light on your head. Now I don't have much to say about this other than that I sort of think there maybe should be a specific flashlight for mounting on a helmet. Currently it just uses the regular flashlight, which is only I think 5.5 inches, but it's still a little bit bigger than what you would put on a helmet mount. A heavy-duty flashlight cannot be used in this mount, and I think that makes sense. I think those are modeled after like those giant mag lights that police carry around. I initially thought this was kind of silly mounting a regular flashlight, but now that I'm sort of thinking about it, it really doesn't matter very much. Anyway, some helmets now have a pocket which can accommodate a flashlight. While I was testing this, however, I did come across an issue. I had a flashlight and I had an army helmet. Now the helmet had a pocket specifically designed to hold that flashlight, but no matter what I did, I could not put the flashlight into the helmet. Some folks on Discord did help me out with this. It looks like a flashlight with a standard light battery weighs more than the helmet's pocket allows, and thus you cannot insert it. However, if you put an ultralight battery in the flashlight, then it would fit in that helmet pocket. So currently, if you want to do this, you're going to have to take out your light battery and replace it with an ultralight battery. The difference is only 0.02 pounds, so I assume this is just an oversight and will be resolved in the future since there was no mention of it in the PR. And this leads me to believe that you didn't test your changes before you submitted them. Shame on you, since pretty much everybody uses standard light batteries in their flashlights. That's what they spawn with. And a special thanks to Bionicle on Discord for pointing out the weight differences. I had not noticed that. It's not really a big deal, but I do foresee people being confused by this since flashlights, like I said, they spawn with light batteries inside of them, and some people might not even know that you could put an ultralight battery in there. And again, I was testing this on an army helmet. This may not be an issue for every helmet in the game, but I'm gonna assume they just copy pasted the pockets, so it probably is an issue. Anyway, moving on now. Next up today, we've got two PRs that added new scenarios. The first one is from Rannick Ortega, which added 3 new scenarios. There's one for starting in the stadium location called Mass Quarantine, there's one for the middle of nowhere, and then there's one that starts you in a sewer called Lost Underground. Also, while I'm mentioning it, this same person actually recently reworked sewers so that they would be a little bit more interesting with various new rooms and underground homeless camps. So I don't know if that makes it worth doing this sewer start, but it would probably have been pretty boring without those additional changes. Anyway, the only thing of note here is the middle of nowhere scenario. It's the only one that requires any explanation. If you attempt to select the scenario, you will see that there are 6 potential locations listed on the final screen of character creation, but you can't actually choose an individual location. So you're not going to actually know where you're going to be starting the game until you get inside, unless there's some way to do that I don't know how to do. The 6 possible starting locations are the state park, the sewage treatment plant, the power substation, derelict property, regional dump, and what I believe is the regional airport terminal. None of these are particularly valuable locations, and their monster density does vary, so, I really wish you could choose which of those you were going to start in, but also it's fine. Now, the other PR that added scenarios was from Terminator244. Now, the main thing here is that it added a variety of new locations so that they could be selected for different existing scenarios. So, for example, if I choose the Missed Starts scenario, I can now select a candy shop or animal shelter as my starting location, which were previously not available. Overall, this is just a nice PR. Having more choices for starting locations is pretty much always a good thing. Now, I will say though, it's not actually related to these PRs specifically, but I think this scenario list in character creation is getting pretty cluttered and a little bit hard to look at. I kind of wish it was collapsible or broken down into categories like the crafting menu. So for example, I could select the word challenge, let's say, and then the nested group would open up and it would show me a list of all of the challenge scenarios. This would just look a lot nicer. The starts were consolidated like a couple of years ago, which made the menu look a lot neater, but it's been growing steadily again into a pretty long list. And it's really not a big deal. There's nothing wrong with this, not really. It just is, it's looking a little cluttered. Alright, and then sorry if this is a bad cut, I'm just going to rip out my original recording here and try this next PR again. The last attempt ended in a 7-minute rant and nobody wants to hear that, so let's strip it down to the basics. This is from Fairy Armadillo and it makes changes to zombie drops. It takes things like the Union suit and tuxedo and makes them significantly less common. Now this makes perfect sense. These garments spawned at a frequency that was genuinely pretty ridiculous, and dropping these down is completely reasonable. They also made a second PR that reduced maid outfit spawns, something else that was entirely too common. So why would such a simple PR lead to me rambling about my annoyance? Well, they actually slipped in a nerf to zombies with bug out bags. Now, we talked about these previously. I believe it was Bombastic Slacks that added them. It was probably less than a year ago. Now, one of my most critical complaints about Cataclysm nowadays is a lack of firearms. Their spawns have been continually nerfed in what I consider to be pretty bad faith changes over the years with the nerfs to military surplus and gun stores, things like that. Usually the excuse is that people would have looted these locations, and then zombies that did have firearms would drop those guns when they became zombies. Now, I've always disliked this argument. If they drop their guns upon dying, we should be finding them dropped on the ground. People imply that everyone would arm themselves in the apocalypse, hence, the gun stores and military surplus stores being looted. But if this is the case and they drop guns when they die, we should find guns littering the streets. But we don't, because people don't actually believe this argument. It's just an excuse for them to nerf gun spawns. Bombastic Slacks added go bags to zombie drops and some locations in an effort to show that people had looted / been preparing themselves for the apocalypse. When we killed those enemies, that's great. We got access to the supplies that they had looted before they died. And these only spawned at a rate of about 1%, which, in my opinion, more than 1% of people would have stockpiled supplies and been carrying them on their person. Now, this PR took issues with these zombies having pristine guns and giving them to the player, despite the fact that it makes perfect sense and that's what they were intended to do. They also took issue with there being food and drinks and nerfed those supplies by 50%. Now, as far as as I can tell, this was a completely arbitrary change because they didn't like the way it was. And if they applied reason and common sense, I think they would not have made these changes. So, to be perfectly frank, I hate this PR. This is a continued attempt to take things away from the player without using the development direction of realism and common sense. Guns are not consumables. In my current playthrough, I have found precisely one gun, and it was a terrible self-defense pistol. I killed cop zombies and got ammo, but no guns. I killed soldier zombies and got magazines, but no rifle. This artificial restriction claiming that every single person died with a gun in their hands and that these guns have simply evaporated into thin air makes me genuinely pretty furious. The implication that no one ever dies with a gun in their backpack or in their holster is actually ludicrous. How many times have you, as the player, died with a gun in your backpack or on your hip or in your car? It happens in basically every single playthrough. But anyway, to circle back to the PR, this person then posted information on what 100 spawns of a zombie will look like currently. Now, despite the fact that this is all pretty much garbage loot, they heavily implied that zombie drops are still too generous. I have no idea how you can look at this list and think it's too generous. The only thing of any value here is the Glock, and to be honest, that is just a shit handgun. The bug out bag would previously have been a really nice find, but as we discussed, it's now been nerfed. So I'm pretty confused as to what you think is too good about this list. But anyway, while this was still somewhat rambly, trust me when I say that this is way better than what I recorded initially. I really dislike this change. But anyway, let's get back to the main show. The next PR is from Terminator and it adds baby wildlife spawns, and forgive me if there's an awkward cut or volume change as we cut back to the video. We have a fair number of baby creatures in the game, and some of them apparently only spawned once the game was started. So it basically required wildlife in order to breed those creatures into existence, and thus they were never spawning any other way. The example used in the PR was for bear cubs, and they're right, I don't think I have ever seen a bear cub in the game, like not even once. I don't think I've ever seen a bear cub. And this is because they required bears to exist and be around long enough to spawn their baby version. Right, so anyway, this PR added several baby animals to the spawn tables. This means that you may now randomly stumble across a baby bear, independent of adult bears being nearby. And while it's true that many baby animals will still be found among their adult versions, it is possible to encounter them on their own. Over time, these spawns will become less common. I don't know if it actually makes perfect sense for them to become less common. We could continue spawning babies to indicate that they were born after the Cataclysm, but I'm going to assume that it's to smooth out the transition, like as more and more wildlife becomes their giant mutated like monster versions of their base creature. And that kind of makes sense to me, at least, so I don't really have complaints there. Like, you know, you'll stop seeing baby bears if all the bears have started mutating into like the Cerberus, basically, or Cerberus, I guess. Hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, there's also the mention of the tameable wildlife mod, since that mod allows you to tame a lot of these baby creatures. And unfortunately, due to the way these animals spawned previously, it had been basically impossible to tame a bear because only their baby form could be tamed. So yeah, I think that's a nice little change. Happy to see this. I know that the tameable mod is like super popular. People love that mod. So get out there and tame and or maybe eat some baby bears, I guess. And I've been using baby bears as an example throughout all of this, but of course this PR did affect other animals as well. And then finally today, from Dave to 2700, we've got a change to the evolution line of Kevlar zombies. So the way this worked previously is that you had zombies wearing Kevlar, like soldier zombies, that would then evolve into Kevlar zombies, which would then evolve into Kevlar Hulks. You've all seen these. This is one of the main upgrade paths that is pretty visible in the game. Sorry, this bird's losing its freaking mind outside my window. Kevlar zombies, despite their name, actually functioned as Kevlar brutes because they had a slam ability and were generally very tough. Well, the purpose of this change was to add an extra step into their evolution process. So basically, Kevlar zombies were renamed to be Kevlar brutes, since they already behaved basically like they were brutes. Then there was a new creature added, which has taken over the name of Kevlar zombie, and it was created as the first step in that evolution. This is a creature that is slowly fusing with its armor and beginning to grow into a Kevlar armored creature. Their armor and other stats seem to be appropriate for what they are, and I have no real criticism critical thoughts about this change. I just wanted to mention it because I saw this and I had partially participated in the conversation about it on Discord prior to the change being merged. And yeah, I think that's the end of the show for this week, everybody. And again, my apologies if this video was late. I had a lot of doctor's appointments this week. Everyone, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I will be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.